Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Okay, Marianne, in the day and age we're living in, I find there are fewer and fewer readers, although I've often wanted to, and I've not done the research on this, but I remember when Twitter was, and it's absolutely, hey, Dan, I'm not sure it's waned much, but they did studies over how many texts and how many tweets the average young person was reading. I always wanted to take that, add up the number of words and find out the equivalency of how many books they were reading, even though none of them wanted to read a book. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Yeah, we consume a ton of words, but it's just not in the form of books.
I know. It makes me sad. We both love reading.
Yes, we do. Well, let me ask this. When did you first fall in love with books?
When I was really young. So there were pieces of my childhood that were really hard.
Yeah.
And so books were my escape to hard. It kind of like what this podcast is about, that our children are escaping into a virtual world.
That's right.
Back then, we didn't have a virtual world. And so I got lost into Anne of Green Gables and fantastic books that just allowed me to leave my reality and kind of enter into a different reality where there's happy endings. And I love to read. We're recording the podcast via Zoom and I'm looking at Ron's library in his background.
Yes. And yes, I love books. I mean, I really, really do. And I am still of the opinion, and I'm not alone in this, but there's something about reading a book with a pen in your hand. Now, I'm going to give you an exception.
Okay.
Fiction books, no problem in a tablet.
Right.
No big deal. But if it's a nonfiction work, I just think there's an interaction we have with that book.
I agree.
Anyway, we chase rabbits here. One of my favorite quotes was on the desk of Harry Truman, and he said this. He said, readers of good books, particularly books of biography and history, are preparing themselves for leadership. Not all readers become leaders, but all leaders must be readers. I've often quoted the last two phrases of his saying, and I do believe that great leaders are also great readers. And we need to really condition our kids. My wife and I, we didn't pay our kids for chores. We just thought that was an expected item to do.
Yeah, we're not going to pay you to live here.
That's right.
I'm with you.
Our community, because you should just naturally know how to do that. Now, they had some things they could earn money for extra above and beyond that, but the primary way they could earn money is by reading the books. And so we would allow them to pick out, and we would pick out books, and we would actually take the cash and create the bookmark. And so we assigned values to a book. And I remember,
that's cool.
Even later on, I actually offered my kids $100 to read a certain book. It wasn't that long of a book, but I knew it would take them a little bit to get into it. Neither one of them took me up on it through that period of time, but they often read $20 books and $50 books, and it would take time, and they would do that, but it would develop them.
That's incredible. That's incredible. We're getting ready to go on vacation and in the mountains, and Chad and I are those evil parents that make our children read on vacation.
Good for you.
We're a hammock family in the mountains. And so we're going to go, we have a family place where we go to fish and rest and kind of escape the hustle and bustle of DFW.
Yes.
And we are going to go set up our hammocks. Each person in our family has a hammock, and they have to bring a book, and they have to read their book. And it's hours are set aside to disconnect from technology and lose themselves in a book. And they really grumble about it in the beginning, but I'll tell you, after they read their book, they always come back and say, "Thanks for making me do that, Mom."
Yes.
And that kind of segues into our interview, the interview today with Kurt and Olivia Bruner. And one of the things he says in the interview is reading has become forgotten because of the digital world and the pace of technology, captivating our children. And so they're going to give us some really great pointers and practical tips and a lots of scientific insight and statistics, so that we can kind of understand the effects that technology is having on our children. So let's give this a listen. And Ron and I are going to jump in after the interview and dialogue a little bit about what they share with us.
We are pleased to announce one of our newest titles, Make Up Your Mind, by Michelle Niedert and Denise Pass. Our mindsets matter. Every day we fight battle after battle in our minds. Negative mindsets limit our existence by keeping us bound in unhealthy habits and attitudes, unless we know how to break free of them. In Make Up Your Mind, you will learn about the root behind common mental battles and negative thought patterns. This book focuses on 10 key negative mindsets and gives tips on how to overcome them using scripture and real-life solutions as we adopt the mind of Christ. Each chapter includes a devotional application section and a Counselor's Corner section featuring licensed counselor Michelle Niedert. Make Up Your Mind is available for purchase now at randallhouse.com.
We are live from the D6 conference, and I am joined by Kurt and Olivia Bruner. Kurt serves persecuted Christians around the world through his work with Open Doors International. He is a former vice president with Focus on the Family, where he led the teams creating films, magazine, books, and the popular Adventures in Odyssey program. As founder of DriveFaithHome.com, Kurt has helped over 700 local churches reach and disciple busy families. And his lovely wife, Olivia, is a former 6th grade teacher and mother of 6 children. She serves on the DriveFaithHome.com coaching team and is a speaker for the Home Point Ministry. She hosts the It Starts at Home video curriculum for parents with Kurt. She is the author of The Minivan Years and PlayStation Nation. Bruners, welcome to the D6 podcast. I'm glad you're here today.
Thanks for having us.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. In 2006, you guys wrote PlayStation Nation, which I love that name. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And in that book, you shared a ton of data, some research that was going on about video games and addiction to screens and things of that nature. Now, that was in 2006, and I want to remind you, it's 2022. So I'm sure those numbers have changed. Can you tell us a little bit about the research that has changed over that 16 years?
Well, I'll let you take that. I will tell you it hasn't gotten better.
I figured
which
so.
You figured.
Yeah, it's just gone up. All of the research has changed. We really recommend for the exact data, because she's up on all of it, is screenstrong.com. And this is a woman who actually read our book in 2006, and she was really struggling with one of her sons with video game addiction. And she said, I would take your book on the plane and I would read it to people, and they thought I was a crazy person because they're like, stop reading me this book. But it really changed the way she looked at media, and she has started this now to really help parents, help families look honestly at the statistics and what's out there and what this is doing to our children as their brains are developing, and how it's really detrimental a lot of times to them.
Yeah, I'd say that at the time, it was the research that was available at the time, and it was current. But this world changes fast. The media world changes fast. The video game world changes fast. And now everything is morphed into mobile devices and so forth. So the same themes are there, and she has kept up really well, and she's a great resource. So I'd recommend that to your listeners.
But really what she's done is the video game, it's interesting, the video game research is about the same. About 3 out of 5, especially boys, become addicted to video games. The girls, it's more social media side, that they become addicted to, and TikTok and all the things that draw them in. So the research with the video games is a little bit worse, clearly, than it was back then. And I think all the other is just new research is coming out. And what's great now is when we wrote our book, there was nothing out on it. Like, we were the first ones, and people were looking at us like, you're crazy. And now
it's everywhere.
Everyone's writing about it because the research is so strong.
But if you think about the last 16 years, the amount of devices that are coming out that are individualized, it's exponential to what it was just 16 years ago.
Exactly. That's exactly what's changed. And so the research is out there, which is great. So when parents or ministry leaders want to make changes or want to do something a little bit differently and recommend something to their parents, they can point to solid research. Which is awesome.
Yeah, let me comment on that. That's important too, because unfortunately, so often people can only think of these topics in terms of what's right and wrong, what's moral, what's immoral, and so forth. And so they'll lean into, well, we don't let them have access to pornography or whatever. But it's really more important to understand brain development and what's happening on that front and how it's forming capacities, tastes, desires, and so forth. So I think it's important, even those in ministry. Our book was not a explicitly Christian book. We were Christians, of course, writing it, but it was more general market research driven. But I think that's actually a good place to start, even those in ministry, so that they don't go into it with a mindset of, well, I don't want to be legalistic and so forth. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has everything to do with what's forming the brains, the habits, the desires of our children. And so we hope that's helpful still.
Yeah, can you all talk about that? Let's talk about their brains, right? Like, this is why we are concerned about this. So what's happening when our kids are in front of screens for endless hours? How are we seeing their behaviors change? What effects are we seeing from that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it basically, when their brains are being developed, it's reforming their brains. It's basically like forming grooves in their brains with all those dopamine highs that they're getting, and it's forming their taste for something. Yeah. So in the past, when going outside and playing or doing these fun things with your friends used to make them happy, now those things don't make them happy anymore, because those new grooves in their brains are basically telling them, no, the only thing that will make you happy is something digital. And you see it all the time. You see a little 3-year-old in a grocery store or a restaurant and an iPad, and when the parents take it away, they just, they can't handle it, and they melt down. And I had a mom ask me one time, so is it okay if my 3-year-old, screams bloody murder, she doesn't get the iPad on the way to preschool every day? And I said, no, it's not okay. I mean, you have basically trained her brain. It's not her fault. Right. Like, you can't even say my child is disobeying. You have trained her brain to want that over other things, over good things. And a friend of mine told me, she's a homeschool mom, and she said she had a grocery store clerk ask her some questions just about her kids, and they just seem to look different and act different, and she doesn't do screens. And what was the phrase that was used?
Peggy Noonan did a feature on this just a few weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, and she was watching a mom whose children were in the line at the grocery store, I think it was, and another mom was watching. And these children don't have any digital, devices. And she asked her about that. Do your children not have any of these? And she says, no, they don't. And she says, well, why do you ask? She says, because I still see childhood in their eyes, and I don't see that in other children's eyes anymore.
That's a painful statement, almost.
Yeah. But so profound, isn't it? That's what we're doing, is we're robbing children of childhood. We're robbing them of future capacity, of the ability to develop a love for and a desire for things, from everything from reading. I mean, you ask the average teenager today, do you read? What do you love to read? Well, I read a tweet, the other day. They don't read books and so forth. So something profound is happening to this generation, and everybody gets it, or everybody at least has a sense of it. But what do we do about it? And particularly those who are in ministry. I mean, the big question is, what do we do about this? Right. And how do we approach it in such a way that we don't come off as being completely out of touch, and at the same time recognize something's not good here.
Yeah, how is this impacting our ministries? It almost feels like we have to be catchy enough, we have to be relatable enough in order to keep up with the, to make them feel like, oh, I do want that, you know? How is this impacting our ministries?
I think it's a little bit of a trap, unfortunately, that we fall into so that we feel we have to. I mean, these things are tools, even social media, even what we're doing right now is a podcast. It's a tool. But our kids are not using them as tools. They're using them for entertainment, basically. Mm-hmm. That's what kids use phones for. They use it for entertainment. And so we fall into this thing, well, we have to keep up with all of this entertainment for them, where really they don't need that. And it's forming them, and it's making them, the research shows, it's making them depressed, it's making them more anxious, it's making them, not relatable to, they don't know how to talk to people anymore. Mm-hmm. So I think we fall into that trap where we're like, churches are like, we need to do what everybody else is doing, but actually, no, you want to help your families help their children become disciples of Christ, not products of our culture. Mm-hmm. So there's a big difference. And that phone is going to try to grab them very young age and make them a product of our culture instead.
That's the big picture, is what's happening in our churches, with our families in our churches, with the kids in our churches. And the reality is, we, as Olivia just said, we're trying to make distinctive disciples of Christ, but overwhelmingly we're becoming products of the culture. Let me give you another context. As you mentioned, I work with persecuted Christians around the world. Real true story. We would begin working with Muslim background believers, which is where a lot of persecution is the heavily Islamic sections of the world. And we would have those converting out of Islam and even becoming pastors after some period of time. And we would get questions like, so what is the Christian way to beat my wife? Which you would, in a Western American Christian, you'd think, what kind of question is that? Why would you even ask that? It's a serious question to them. It wouldn't even occur to them in their cultural context that you don't beat your wife. It's a normal and accepted practice. So now I want to know how to do that as a Christian, the proper way. Well, we of course have to explain, let's go into the Bible and explain what marriage is and so forth. But they've never had a biblical understanding of marriage or biblical assumptions that are so common in the West. Or at least used to be so common in the West. So the point is, they're products of their culture, right? And we're not thinking of how is that culture shaping them, even more than what they're reading in the Bible. Well, let's go to our context. What's shaping the next generation? It's whatever's coming on that mobile device. Right. It's not what's being said at church. It's not what's being said at home, unless we're very intentional about figuring out a strategy to counter that. So, the question might be, well, how does the church compete with social media? And the answer is you don't. You don't compete with a storm if you're a boat out on the water. You recognize that there's a storm around, and you make adjustments and accommodate the reality that you're dealing with. You don't try to figure out how to make your ship part of the storm. So I think it's recognizing it as a challenge, and then we, as church leaders, say, well, then what can we do to help families who are trying to sail their ship in the midst of these storms? Not how do we, get with the storm, if you will.
Yeah. This is great stuff. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Splink is a simple way to help families in your church link together spiritually. It comes as a free weekly email with ideas that parents can use to have fun, make memories, and talk with their kids. Those teachable moments give moms and dads opportunity to share spiritual truths and life lessons. And no matter how busy life is, there's always time to Splink. Share d6family.com with the parents in your ministry so they can sign up today to start receiving free weekly Splink.
We are back with Kurt and Olivia Bruner having such a great conversation. Let's talk about one of the things, Kurt, you said is we're trying to make disciples here. I feel like this has to be impacting our discipleship, though, with our kids. How is this really affecting that?
I think I was at an event the other day with moms, and I just had a mom say, I'm not really sure what to do because we've chosen to delay technology with our children until they're late high school. So they don't have a phone, they don't have social media, they don't have any of that until late high school. We want their brains to develop. We want them to get a love for other things. But at church, they want them to have phones because they do everything on phones. They
play games on there,
and they feel out of it. And what am I supposed to do about it? And I basically said, you're the young moms, innovate. You know, you got to figure it out. You have to go to your youth pastor and say, hey, I need you to communicate to my children a different way, not just through social media, not just through Twitter. Maybe you're using those as outreaches. But that doesn't mean every 12-year-old needs to have a phone and they're on social media and they're on Twitter and that's the only way you can communicate to them. So I think it's a huge challenge. You know, it's a rethink of what have we jumped into and begun to do, and how are we going to pull back a bit? Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned drivefaithhome.com. Well, it's through that churches contact us to get advice on how to navigate some of these things. Well, there's one large church in Austin where we are that is very, very serious about this particular topic. And so the discussion is about how do we help those counterculture parents who are making different choices feel less like they're out of sync, even at church, that they're out of sync. Our kids are a good example. They grew up, part of the joke was at our church was, well, at least we're not as strict as the Bruner family. You know, that was our ministry to every other family was, well, at least they can say, but we're not as strict as the Bruner. But we weren't actually that strict. But we had these conversations with our kids in terms of what choices we're making and so on and so forth. But they would tell you that, you know, even at our church, great evangelical church and so forth, I was one of the pastors on staff, we feel like we're odd here. Well, that shouldn't be. And so we as church leaders have to ask ourselves, how do we help those families that are making courageous counterculture choices not feel like the odd ones at church, but rather feel like the trendsetters at church, the cutting edge ones at church, not the out of step ones at church. And so you're right, we have to innovate. We have to say, well, what does that look like? And this generation of leaders has to figure that one out. We can't just keep passively going along with and saying, well, yeah, they're products of the culture, but can't do anything about it. Yes, we can. We can do something about it.
One of the things, Olivia, you said is that it's cutting down on their ability to communicate face-to-face. Yeah. I have a 13-year-old. He does not have a phone. We just moved 4 months ago to a new state, new town, new school, everything. Wow. Which is a huge adjustment.
Big deal
for anybody, but a 13-year-old especially.
Yes.
They have a cell phone policy at their school that they can have cell phones out at lunch. So he's sitting at a table with people that he is assigned because of COVID and everything. He has to sit at that table with kids who all have cell phones, whose noses are in those phones. And my son, who is one of the most bubbly, friendly kids on the planet, is having difficulty building relationships with these kids because
they're
their
sitting
nose
right across
is
from
in the phone. Yeah, so I said, Desmond, like, are they actually responding to you? Like, if you talk? And he said, yes. They will look up and comment and then put their nose back in the phone. So it really has been a great opportunity for me to talk with him about, do you see why you don't have one, you know? But because he's still longing for that communication, because he's able to do that. I say that to say, I feel like that lends itself in discipleship for me to disciple a young woman to say, like, let's sit and have a conversation. I feel like I have to set my phone down and to the side and encourage her to do the same thing in order to get to disciple her. Would you say that that's accurate? I mean, is that like hindering our one-on-one discipleship with our own kids and within the kids with our ministries?
Well, you're touching on a huge reality for young people. Tell the story of the young woman who asked for her dad's phone to go to a party.
Oh, yeah. So another couple from our church, when I shared that day on technology, she said, so my 13-year-old was getting to go to like a sleepover at someone's house, and she asked if they don't have a phone, same thing, and she said, well, can I bring Dad's phone? And her mom said, no, you can't bring your father's phone, to your sleepover. And she said, why do you want it? She goes, because I'll be the only one without it, and they'll be on their phones the whole time. And so here it is.
Thus defeats
the feeling of loneliness.
She is at the party, and those girls are lonely too that have the phones. That's the thing.
Right.
They are, because they're only communicating through those phones. So, what I said to her is, I said, well, you could have her try to bring some other things that the kids would like to engage in. Maybe some other kind of crafty things the girls would like, or some fun ideas for games, or just suggestion, let's go outside and do this. And those are all helpful, but with these kids that are stuck in their phones, it's very, very hard to pull them away.
Right.
And you have to be a strong personality to be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Well, and come back to the point of those of us who listen to this podcast is we tend to think in terms of ministry, in terms of how do we help? How do church leaders help with this? Well, it starts by recognizing this and saying, okay, instead of just assuming everyone has this, and in fact, hopefully encouraging them not to have this, I need to change how I do things, as simple as how do I communicate what's happening this weekend at church? Have I accommodated or in fact encouraged families who aren't going down that path? Because again, they continue to feel out of sorts and out of step, and their children feel that way even at church. Well, let's be the adults. Let's stop that from that feeling.
And we say this we have 30, 28, 24, 21. They all have phones now. All have smartphones. They use them for their work, for school, for jobs. They know, we've taught them, so they know the limits. They probably, just like every other adult, they have to watch themselves, just like you said, put your stuff aside for the times that you need it. But we always told our kids, you will have one eventually. Yeah. We just want your brains to develop and get strong and their taste to be there before we give you a technology that your brain is not supposed to have. Right. You
just can't handle that.
Yes.
Right.
But I just think we've all fallen into this, and it's really, really hard for parents when at church they even feel out of place because the church is like, well, everybody has one, so that's the only thing we're going to do. Yeah.
Do you guys have any resources to share? Anything that a parent, a church leader can take a look at to help equip them in this area?
Yeah. Well, screenstrong.com is always what I recommend because she is on top of it. She does it full time. It's all she does. She has a podcast. And so she's up on all the research. So I always say if you need something in your pocket to give your kids as you make harder decisions or churches decide to teach this to their parents, then she's the one to go to. But we have some home point material also.
Yeah, on this larger topic, though, I think I'd say on our dryfaithhome.com site in the blog section, I just did an interview with Rod Dreher, and we talk extensively about this issue of being products of the culture versus being distinctive disciples of Christ. And that's more on the big picture side of this, and then you drill into the specific issues. And this is just one of the specific issues, that we're dealing with. But it's a big one. It perhaps is the biggest that everyone seems to be struggling with. Also, the churches we work with have implemented a campaign that we produced, which is just a thematic thing that helps the church family have the dialogue about, okay, what does it look like to make God-honoring choices on your smart devices?
Yeah.
And what does it look like in terms of agreements with your kids? What does it look like in terms of having tech-free zones? One of the things we gave all of the families in the church as part of that kit was some tech-free zone tools. One, a folded thing on the table for the dinner table, but one was actually a what do they call them when you hang them in the car and it smells?
Car scent.
Yeah, a car scent thing.
Yeah.
So, but it was labeled there. This is a tech-free zone. And one of the dads was telling the story of his son wanted to play whatever it was on an iPad or something. He said, "No, buddy, we're in tech-free zone, so you can't do that here." And then they stopped at a stoplight, and Mason pulled up his phone to check something, and the son says from the back seat, "Dad, this is tech-free zone.
Exactly.
Put the phone down," which said it all, right?
Yeah.
He said, "Okay, we've got to help protect their brains, but we also have to remember they're watching and to be sensitive to these things." But again, I think as churches we can create that culture, shift that culture to say, guys, this isn't okay. And we as followers of Christ need to be distinctive, and we need to help our children with a real problem. Everybody gets that it's a problem. Everybody's talking about it, but let's actually do something, to shift this.
Let's find out ways to make it work,
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much, Bruners, for being with us.
We've loved it.
It's great stuff. Check out those resources. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having
us. All right,
us.
thank you. Blessings.
Wow. One of my favorite statements they made is the kids should not be products of our culture. They should reflect Christ to our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt, our devices, our technology, our viewing habits really do reflect culture. We're consuming what culture is sending our way in this.
That's right.
What jumped out at you, Marianne?
I loved what they talked how they shared about brain development, and they talked about tastes and desires, and our devices are forming our tastes and desires, and that it scares me. It scares me. I mean, not in a place of where I'm going to live in fear and doubt, but it's impacting what my kids desire. It's impacting what I desire. Let's just be real about our own hearts and minds here. It's impacting our tastes and desires and what we think about and what we're pursuing. And their brains are so young and not completely in development, but they're living in two worlds, Ron. They're living in a virtual world where they kill people and creatures and whatever. And then they live in this real world where they go to school or whatever that looks like for your child. So they're having to literally navigate two full worlds, which is just so difficult. I'm sure it's this tug of war, which, has been at play since the beginning of time between two different worlds.
Right. That's right. I read an article, and I'm maybe getting off track here, and if we are, we can edit this out. But I found it intriguing. What you just said prompted these words, that organizations that are providing virtual realities and virtual games. I've not played any of them. I don't know what they're like, but where they're creating these avatars and creating these alter personas, including all the physical characteristics of a person or a being. The organizations and the legal system is now becoming involved because oftentimes there is inappropriate behavior going on inside of those worlds that are not invited or not.
Right.
And so that would never take place in the real world without there being legal implications. And now they're beginning to question the ethics of these areas.
These virtual,
affecting them mentally. That's the point I want to make, is these worlds, as you just said, jumping back and forth from real to virtual. Just because we're in a virtual world doesn't mean it's not affecting our real world thinking.
That's right. That's right. It's impacting integrity.
Yes.
It's impacting thinking, and
right.
As I've heard a quote several years ago: what you think about, you care about; what you care about, you chase.
That's
Ben Stewart said that at a conference that I went to. What you think about, you care about. What you think about settles down into your heart, and what you care about essentially in your living is what you're going to chase.
That's right.
And it's a scary thing to think about in terms of the effects of technology on our world and our kids.
That's right. And I would say it differently. What our kids do separate from adults also define who their hearts are too. Meaning, adults, I'll say it differently. How you respond when the boss is away is defining what type of employee you are, whether he or she is present or not present.
Who you are when no one else is looking. That's the measure of who you are. That really is the measure of who you are.
And so, these are what we're bumping into and what Kurt and Olivia is talking about. And unfortunately, the devices do not allow the right boundaries and supervision apart from a biblical worldview and a strong relationship with your parents to have regular conversations about these areas.
That's right.
Yeah. So, they talked about limits and boundaries.
Yes.
You and I were talking about this in a previous episode about how we say things to certain people.
Mm-hmm.
If I had it to go over and do again, and my wife and I haven't talked about this, but we talked openly about when to give the cell phone to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what I know now, and we don't get a chance to go back, I do think there would be different boundaries inside of our homes for where those devices sit.
I think one of the things that I'm battling in my stage of life is I've got a tween and I've got a teen, and I feel like I'm doing, you guys can't see me, but I'm moving back and forth. It's like a push and a pull. And it's with technology and discipleship and digital discipleship. I feel like they're experiencing this world, really, to be honest with you, faster than I can keep up with, than Chad and I can keep up with. And so that's the nature of, oh my goodness, like they're headed down this road and it feels like it's not stopping. It's like the Texas Giant. It doesn't stop. It's a roller coaster that doesn't stop. And so for me as a parent, it's God, show us, keep us aware, show us how to push and pull and where to put limits and where to put boundaries. But here's the thing, bigger than that is my boys are old enough. They've got to know how to put limits on themselves. Yes. As a parent, I've got to create space for limits. Yes. I purchased the device for them to have. So there's still a place for me to put boundaries and expectations and limits on them. But they're also at the stage where it's important that we're equipping them to have the taste and the desire to get off.
That's right.
And to
And modeling
experience
it.
Christ. And model it. Yes.
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 Yeah.
So
No.
I appreciate their perspective 100%. And it's just helping this podcast helped me walk away to sit down with Chad and just, help, and our boys.
Yes.
Because it's not just Chad and I having a separate conversation. My boys are old enough to contribute. Guys, we all need limits. So let's all talk together about what that needs to look like. Because listen, when they have ownership into what limits need to look like, they're in.
Yeah.
When they feel like we're constantly putting parameters around them, but not inviting them into the conversation, it's a little bit tougher to get them to get buy-in.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So,
No, that's good. That's really good. Well, the last comment I'll make, and I'll just toss it out there, that was really unsettling. I think you and I talked prior to jumping in, was kids lose their childhood through electronics. When they said that, I was like, wow. So if that is the case, and we can see the sparkle in their eyes and the twinkle in their eyes, and when it's there and not there. And I think part of it comes from seeing things that they should not see and then not knowing how to process it. So we can't help them unsee it, but we can help them process it. And that's what I would encourage our parents to do.
That's right.
Well, we're getting ready to look forward to next week. We've got Ryan Garrett, who is going to continue this conversation at great degree on this. And it's a regular item, and I think it's important. So we're back to school, and, we're in the month of October when this next one releases as well. And at this point, kids need those escapes, like we talked about, the books, the online, whatever it is. Let's just make sure those escapes are the right way. So we're giving you lots of information to help navigate this virtual and digital world.
And make your kids read, okay?
That's right.
Just make them read, okay,
Make
parents?
them or pay them, either one. It's vitally important. I agree. We're praying for you, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.